Hello and welcome. Thanks for watching our video. We're going to be going over basic techniques on a flower dip. We'll be using AdDIPted Nail Dips Milk Bath Jade flower, which has some wonderful flowers and foils as well. We'll be using our AdDIPted liquids. You can use just about any dip liquid or gel liquid, but it's recommended you use our liquids as they're formulated to work with our dips. We will also cover a basic glitter dip on the accent. So what we have here in front of us is our activator, our dip base and top coat, which is used for just that, the base and the top coat. We have our cuticle stick, a paper towel to wipe down the brush in between dips, a plastic baggie so that we can flatten the dip, a basic nail buff or your choice of nail file, a brush to wipe off excess powder once you dip, and I'll be using a glove in place of the plastic baggie, but I will be using the baggie as well to show you how to use that. I also have an electric e-file, and we'll show you how to use that as well. It's very useful in smoothing out your mani once it's complete. So I'm just going to set these items aside and open up my jar. And I usually pour it into a cupcake liner, which I highly recommend because it makes it easier to apply, because you can lay into the dip rather than dipping into the jar itself. I've prepped my nails already, so you would follow your normal prepping method. I actually use full coverage tips, but I don't use them all the way down to the cuticle line. So however you prepare your nails prior to dipping, go ahead and follow those instructions as you normally would. I've already done my other few nails so that I can work on just the accent and the flower dip nail to show you more thoroughly. So I'm going to pour my powder into the cupcake liner, and you'll want to give it a little bit of a shake. It helps the flowers and materials float to the top so that you can capture as much flowers as you can into your dips, because that's the goal here. We want to give you as many flowers into the dip as much as possible. So I will start by doing my first nail. I use the 3/4 method, which helps build a wonderful apex. So I go in 3/4 of the way down and apply evenly by fanning out the brush and thin coats, and make sure I cover the entire area so that we pick up as much as the dip as possible. So then I'll lay that into the powder, and then I'll gently tap off any excess and then pat in my flowers. So if you're using a liquid that is slow drying, that's perfect because it allows you some time to pat in the materials so they sink into the dip. That way you can have a flatter look. I then will go in with my cuticle stick and clean up the cuticle lines on the sides, just to make sure that there's any excess materials out there and kind of move that out of the way. And then I'll continue to kind of pat down gently so that the flowers sink into the dip as much as possible before going on to my next dip. So you can see they sink in as much as they possibly could, and then I'll brush off any excess before I go. You could use a nail file to buff in between dips, but just know that you may lose some flowers. That does help flatten the dip in the whole process. And as I recommend with all our colors, we do a minimum of 3 dips, with the exception of glitters, which I'll go over here in a minute. And I'm just going to brush off the excess powder before beginning my next dip. Shake up the liner one more time so that everything floats to the top, and apply a second coat, evenly, thin, and as close to the cuticle as possible, but not quite there yet. Our liquids are self-leveling, so that helps a lot when applying each coat. And then I will press that into the dip. And this time I caught a bunch of flowers. And so, again, go in with your glove or your plastic baggie and just gently press them into the liquid, cleaning the cuticle line as well. And like I said, if you're using a liquid that doesn't set right away, you do have some time to kind of play with this. If you're using a liquid that dries fast, it is difficult to pat in and work with right away. You have to work fast. But here we have some time, kind of pick off all the excess materials that are falling off. And then, as you can see, it's a little bit flatter. And then continue patting and cleaning your cuticle lines till you've achieved what you want. Then dust off the excess powder. Now for this last dip, the third dip, I will show you a bit of a trick. And so, as you can see, it's as smooth as you possibly can get it at this point. And so what I will do is take my cuticle pusher, a stick, and just kind of brush aside the flowers and the materials so that I have as much of the base powder left as possible. And the reason I do this is because on my last dip, I use that powder to encapsulate the amount of flowers that I have already. I have a good amount on those first two dips, so I want to make sure that they stay there. So I'll apply my third coat, which will go as close to the cuticle line as possible. Again, apply even thin coat and make sure the entire nail is covered. And then I will wipe off my brush in between the dip and apply it to that section that I cleared out. And like I said, this one serves as a way to encapsulate your flowers so that when you buff, you don't lose a lot of them. And two, it also gives that wonderful milk bath frost type of look to your nail. So it serves two purposes. So I'm cleaning my cuticle lines and again pat everything down nicely. And you want to be careful to wipe your brush in between. I forgot to mention, but be sure to do that so you don't contaminate your liquids. I'm going to go ahead and put this away at this point because I'm going to get ready to activate that nail. And then once I activate it, actually before I activate, you brush off the excess powder. Our activator has a dropper, so we don't contaminate the activator. It makes it a lot easier and lasts a lot longer. So I'll point my nail down so that the activator drips all over the entire nail and saturates every inch, because you want to make sure, because this is what's going to harden the dip. And then I will set that aside and I will let it set in for a minimum of 2 minutes before I start buffing or shaping. And in the meantime, I will go over and work on the accent nail, which is a glitter. Now with glitters, I normally use 2 coats or 2 dips. That's enough usually to cover and achieve the color of the glitter. And it makes it a lot easier to work with when you're filing at the end, because if you don't encapsulate glitters, you can lose the luster of it. It can buff away, turn silver. So especially if it's not a glitter that's meant that can run with the liquids. I forgot the term that's used, but you want to make sure that you protect the glitter's color as much as possible. So for that, I go down actually a little bit further than 3/4 on the first step, tap off the excess, and then I use a little baggie to smooth out the glitter as much as possible. kind of similar like what you do with the flowers, but with the glitter, it's a little bit, especially with chunky glitters, it can get everywhere. And clean those cuticle lines as well. So you'll kind of go back and forth and do the patting and the cuticle line cleaning just to make sure you achieve the cleanliness of the lines and everything, and make sure it's as smooth as possible, because once you encapsulate, you should only be doing light buffing, not like major buffing, especially with glitters, like I said, because they can buff away the color of the glitter and then you lose the look of it. So I'll go in with my second and last coat, because I only do 2 dips of the glitter. And I go as close to the cuticle line as you can. And coat evenly. And you really want to make sure you clean your brush before putting it back in your bottle, especially with glitters, because it can contaminate very easily. So I'll go in for that second dip. Pat down. And this time I'm using the glove to pat it down, but you can use the baggie as well. And do the same thing. Clean the cuticle lines with your cuticle stick. And use a plastic bag or a glove to pat down the glitter as much as possible. You don't want to pat it down too hard to where you shift the glitter on the nail. You just want to pat it down enough to where it sets and smooths out nicely. Take off any excess pieces that are kind of hanging out there. You just want to pat it gently. And then, of course, brush off any excess powder before you activate it. And I go in one more time with the cuticle stick just to make sure that everything is cleaned off from the edges before I activate it, because once you activate it, it's set in and it's a little bit harder to work with at that point. And so once you do your activator, I will go back actually to the first nail I was working on and do your shaping. And I'll kind of fast forward through that section, because everyone does a different shape for their nail. So however you shape your nails, you can do that at this point. And then I'll go into instruction on the buffing itself. So once you've done your shaping, you can start to file it. I'm going to use an e-file. You can use a regular file as well. If you are using an e-file, start at the lowest speed setting. You want to take it slow, especially if you're very new to using an e-file. You don't want to hurt yourself. These are just techniques I've used and developed along the way in my years of doing at-home dipping. I'm not a licensed tech, so you have to be very careful when approaching, especially e-files. I'm using just a basic sander. Normally, you could go in with a cone-shaped one to kind of get the cuticle areas, but I wanted to just get through this video as simply as possible, so I went ahead and used just a basic sanding bit to lightly go over the entire nail, doing smooth strokes back and forth, just smooth, even strokes back and forth to get an even surface. Doing the edges a little bit just to make sure they're nice and clean. Checking your apex every once in a while just to make sure you're filing in the right places. But take it very slow, low speed setting. I'll probably go off camera here in a little bit so that I can get a little bit closer in and just continue doing those smooth strokes till you achieve the smoothness that you want. And maybe even follow up with a nail file, which I'll do here in just a little bit. So as you can see here, that's my somewhat finished product, but I'm gonna go in with a regular nail file to kind of smooth out those little bumps. Because I used the e-nail file at such a low setting, it didn't get absolutely all of it. So rather than turning it up to a higher speed, I just went ahead and went in with a regular nail file to kind of get those tiny little bumps, those last ones, out, so I can have a very smooth surface to work with. As you can see, it smoothed it out perfectly. So it's just about knowing what you want to use, as gentle as possible on your nails. I'm following up with a buffer just to give it smooth shine. But like I said, you want to just take it slow. It takes time to learn, and that's the finished result for the flower dipped nail. So I'm going to go ahead and activate. But before, you could also use the dip coat itself to encapsulate prior to buffing. I should have mentioned that before, but that's what I'm going to do here with the glitter. So prior to doing any kind of buffing on my glitter, I'm going to use my very same base and top coat, wipe down that brush real good to encapsulate the glitter. You could use this for the flower one as well, but I didn't in this video because I used the powder itself to encapsulate. So I'm going to activate the flower dip, and while that sets, I'm going to go back to my glitter and give it one more coat. So I usually encapsulate it with 2 coats. You could do 3 if you choose, of the nail dip. This is prior to buffing. And I wait my 2 minutes till it sets in, just because I want to make sure that it dries thoroughly before I go in with that nail file. And with glitters, I just use a regular buffer, actually. I don't use a really strong grit nail file. I use a light buffer to go over it. So as you can see, that one we worked on is pretty smooth. The other nails, I applied the same technique, so I'm just going to go ahead and start doing my top coat on that one while I wait for the glitter to set before I go in and buff the glitter one. And so I will top coat all of these, minus the one flower dip we worked on, because that one's still setting. You don't want to go in with your top coat before the activator is completely dry, because you will easily contaminate your liquids and they'll gel up. So definitely wait. I usually wait a good 5 minutes if I can before doing this last bit. And I do 2 coats of our base and top coat, and then I will wait about a minute and go in and actually do a 3rd coat to really get it to shine. So looks like that glitter one is dry. So I'm going to go ahead and go with a buffer. Oops, I touched my thumb. But yeah, I touched it a little bit. So let me just go ahead and get some dip coat and coat that little area just to make sure it dries thoroughly. And I will do my 3rd coat while I'm at it of each one of the nails that I just did the 2 coats on, so that I can get that real pretty shine on them. And then I'm going to go in with a light buffer and buff the glitter down. And so at this point, I've buffed down as much as I could with the buffer. I may do a little bit more. And because I encapsulate it with the very same dip and top coat, it doesn't affect the luster of the glitter itself. And that's why I use this technique. You could use a clear dip powder to encapsulate glitter, especially with chunky glitters. It can be a little bit more challenging, but usually the same dip top coat that I use works perfectly to encapsulate especially fine glitters. And then I just go in with a light buffer to take out all the bumps, smooth out all the bumps as much as possible without affecting the actual color of it. So I maintain the luster of it. And so then I'm going to go in with my activator and activate my glitter. Make sure to saturate every inch of the nail and then wait my 2 minutes. And in the meantime, I will work on that one flower dipped nail and put the top coat because it's about ready. Being sure to wipe your brush down before you dip it back into the bottle. You don't want to contaminate your liquids. So yes, it looks like the thumb one needs another coat. When you do what I just did with the thumb, you want to make sure to really let it dry. If it's still sticky or didn't dry properly, you'll have to go in, rebuff, reactivate, and do it all over again. But so far, it seems to be drying just a little bit slower on that thumb that I messed up. But I've gone in and done my 2 coats. I'll wait a minute and then I'll go in with a 3rd coat on that one pointer finger. But for the most part, we are actually done with our mani. And here's the end result. Hopefully this video helped you to learn to apply flower dips a little bit better. They are challenging, but when you get them, they just look absolutely beautiful. I got a little cut on my thumb, so I will post a picture of this finished mani along with this video once I put some cuticle oil on. And hope this helped. Thank you for watching, and be sure to visit our Facebook group, Instagram page, and our website.